will start with saying that the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths. He taught about suffering, the causation of suffering. He talks about the end of suffering. But he doesn't just talk about suffering and let you just hanging there. He taught us the formula towards end of suffering, and that is the Noble Eightfold Path. So if you call yourself a Buddhist, you have to exercise right speech. Why? Because right speech is one of the paths in the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, yes. So I'm going to off my video now. I want your attention to be actually on the screen. Yeah? Under the fourth noble truth, right, is the Noble Eightfold Path. Now, wisdom is the forerunner of the path because it contains knowledge of the Four Noble Truths that enables us to practice in the correct and most direct way to achieve the higher happiness of peace and tranquility in our daily life. But wisdom at the beginning only serves as a DIY manual. But the true practice starts with morality. Morality is important because it provides the necessary foundation for the development of concentration and the cultivation of right insight wisdom that can lead you to enlightenment. Morality is. So for today, we start with right speech. And what bhikkhus is right speech? You can read this on your own. The Buddha's teaching was on right speech because the spoken word was the only form of verbal communication for most people right then. Things are very different now. More channels for speech like the phone, FaceTime, Skype, Zoom, and video conferencing. Now that most people can write and read. We also have written communication in the form of letters, emails, social messaging through WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc. Verbal communication also includes the tone of your voice, facial expression, gestures. The word speech includes all these in today's world. My talks on right speech for the next 3 weeks will be structured in this sequence. Now, the teachings of all Buddhas is to avoid evil, do good, and to purify the mind. The standard of definition of right speech, which deals with restraint, comes under avoiding evil. Before you can start to think about speaking well, how to do good speech, you must first abstain from these four. We will first look at why and how we exercise restraint, and then we can improve our verbal communication regard to doing good part. And lastly, we will see how right speech plays a part in our mental cultivation as a whole. Most Buddhists consider themselves practitioners if they meditate. True Vipassana meditation is a unique feature of Buddhism and not found in other spiritual practice. So how often do you meditate? And how long? Then how about speech? How often and long? Throughout the day, we have a lot spent on business correspondence, meetings, idle chatter with family, friends and colleagues, not to mention socializing on WhatsApp, Instagram, emails, etc. In this case, why is right speech given so little attention compared to meditation? And who in this webinar has correctly practiced right speech as you understand it in the last 24 hours? For some people, abstaining from these four forms of speech means they do not have any freedom of speech. In this case, speaking without restraint or censorship. Worse, no more talking. In reality, right speech is extremely difficult to practice. In this series of Dharma Bites on right speech, We are going to explore the reasons why we find it hard to practice right speech in a correct, consistent manner. We have to first know and understand the forces that shape unskillful speech, that makes us tell lies, slander, abuse others verbally, and get carried away with inane chatter and gossip. Then we come up with ways to contain and control ourselves to improve sila as a whole. So for today, we are just going to cover false speech. Now, there are altogether 8 segments for this talk, this week and next week. We're going to define what exactly is false speech, looking at statistics on lying, why do people lie, understanding dishonesty, gray areas in lies, importance of honesty, why we should avoid lying, and how to reduce dishonesty. Under item 4, understanding dishonesty, we are going to look at research and experiments done to study the psychology of dishonesty. So now let's have a look at definition. Please read this on your own. In summary, it is believing or knowing one thing while intending to communicate another, that every lie is born. A lie, therefore, carries with it the intention to deceive or mislead others when honest communication is expected from us. Distortion or omission of facts is also considered lying because of their intention to deceive. Taking into this consideration, right, 3 aspects of falsehood. We have falsification, distortion, and omission. Musawada can be expanded to cover the spectrum of dishonest acts, such as these shown on this slide. Lies can be blatant or subtle, simple or elaborate like forging documents, making promises you do not intend to keep, or keeping tactical silence can also be lying as long as you have the intention to deceive. Many of these forms, example cheating, fraud, counterfeit, impersonation, straddle both speech and action. Now this quote, right, should be familiar to you all. This is from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. So when the word dishonesty or deception is used in the sutta, they refer to falsehood in both speech and action. For example, cheating can be associated with sexual misconduct and action, and you will find the person lying about it. Now that we know exactly what is the definition of right speech, next we look at the statistics on lying. The truth is that we are all quite prone to lying. Numerous studies point to a very widespread lying in our daily lives. Now, the statistics which I'm going to show you are taken from a 2000 study by the University of Massachusetts, as well as a 2017 study by the Statistic Brain Research Institute, SBRI. A UK study shows a more modest but still startling average of 10 lies a week. 31% was reported by SBRI. The research shows that women normally lie about their weight and men about their height, financial status, and educational qualifications. The figures certainly show that we lie quite a bit. And that is not all. The study involved more than 200 children between 3 and 5 years of age. And it was found that kids as young as 4 years of age are able to tell deliberate lies, and these abilities increases in sophistication with age. These statistics shows us that we have a big capacity for dishonesty. Ironically, a study by the University of Toronto found that it is actually the most trusting people who are best able to tell when they are being lied to. Also, the better you are at lying, the worse you are at detecting lies. Like attracts likes. Armed with statistics, we go on to understand why do people lie. As the Buddha pointed out, people like to serve their own needs for the sake of others and because lying helps them to achieve a goal or reward. Let us look at this in more detail. You can read this on the screen. You lie to serve one's own needs. Lying for the sake of others. Whether we like to benefit ourselves or to benefit others, it all boils down to what? Ego, egotism, this sense of self. Everybody wants to be liked, to be admired, to be respected. No one likes to lose face. So our lies are usually tied to self-esteem and self-preservation. Even when we lie to spare the feelings of others, it is usually done to ensure that the person maintains a good opinion of us or like us better. We have seen earlier that children start telling lies as early as 4 years of age. Who do you think they learn that from? How many of you were told by our parents and grandparents that we have to behave or else the police, the mata, will come and catch us? How many of you were told that the stock brought you or you were picked up from the longkao or the drain because our parents were too embarrassed to tell us about the birds and the bees? And how many of us believed in Santa Claus when we were young? The truth is, we may knowing or unknowingly teach children to tell lies, especially white lies, through examples. What they ultimately learn is not, well, what they ultimately learn is that even though honesty is the best policy, lying at times is actually okay. The Dharma is about reality, isn't it? And we know that as long as we are not enlightened, our deeds will always be governed by the lobha, dosa, and moha, greed, hatred, and delusion, the three roots of evil that gives us the sense of self. These three roots of evil, all right, gives rise to a myriad of defilement that comprises all the negative mental states, examples of which are shown here. Greed, hatred, and delusion are called underlying tendencies, which are present in all of us as long as we do not realize the Four Noble Truths. It's just to what extent. So there is a mixture of truth and lies in our lives, despite the Buddha giving us a clear moral framework of do's and don'ts. We are not arahants, so we cannot be expected to be 100% honest all the time. It is not that we want to lie. After all, we are influenced from a young age to tell lies. And we get confused sometimes because the line between lies and truth is often not as clear as we would like. I'm going to show you some questions which I'm sure have popped up in your mind at one time or another. You can read this on the screen, and after the talk today, you will know the answer. To help answer these questions, I have actually taken the liberty of including some interesting facts compiled from the lab and public experiments that were conducted by Professor Dan Ariely and his team of researchers. The information is taken from his book. You can read this if you're interested. It's called The Honest Truth About Dishonesty: How We Lie to Everyone, Especially Ourselves. So also included are the conclusions he's made based on the result of his experiment. His findings and conclusions made will be examined vis-a-vis the Buddha's teachings. We will see how they all tie in together. This will help us better understand and appreciate what the Buddha taught. It will also help us understand the mental machinery that works behind the scenes in our mind that makes us decide to be honest or not. Then we come up with a workable solution on how to decrease dishonesty, which I will touch on next week. Now we move on to the next topic, understanding dishonesty. Professor Ariely conducted a number of experiments to determine the conditions under which people will cheat and by how much. The standard experiment and the one most frequently used is called a matrix experiment. Each participant received a sheet of paper containing 20 different matrices like this, and he had to find in each matrix two numbers that added up to 10. They were given 5 minutes to solve as many of the 20 matrices as possible. For each correct answer, he will get paid 50 cents. The matrix experiment also served as a control experiment where there is no room for cheating. Participants solved an average of 4 out of 20 matrices, which reflects the average. For another test, participants were told to shred their worksheet at the back of the room before they tell the experimenter how many matrices they have solved and collect the reward. This means they can cheat. In this case, what do you think is the average number of matrices solved? 6 out of 20. More experiments were conducted, and not all are matrix experiments. And they were modified accordingly to test some assumptions about dishonesty. Now, the first paradigm or assumption that was put into the test was this. The experiment varied the amount of reward from 25 cents all the way to $10 for each correct answer. The average score was again 6 out of 20 matrices, but the amount of cheating was slightly lower when the reward was pegged at the highest amount of $10. The second assumption that was put to the test was this. The average score was still 6 out of 20 matrices. Based on these experiments, Professor Ariely discovered that people are primarily driven by two opposing motivations. On the one hand, we want to think of ourselves as honest, honorable persons. We want to be able to look at ourselves in the mirror and feel good about ourselves. On the other hand, we want to benefit from cheating and get as much as possible out of it. Where do people draw the line? This is where our amazing rationalization comes into play. We reckon that as long as we cheat just a little, we can benefit from it. Our sense of integrity is not threatened, and we can continue to see ourselves as decent human beings. So many people think that it's okay to cheat on parking coupons, right, by 5 or 10 minutes. So when the opportunity arises, that's what we do. Most of us are just like that. We are either blissfully unaware of how good we are at rationalizing, or we just do not want to admit it. Now, let's look at the summary of forces that shapes dishonesty. Ability to rationalize. conflicts of interest, creativity, one immoral act, being depleted, others benefiting from our dishonesty, watching others behave dishonestly, culture that gives examples of dishonesty. All these factors increase dishonesty. What has no effect? Amount of money to be gained, probability of being caught. And what decreases dishonesty? The pledge, signatures, moral reminders, and supervision. We will spend some time looking at the findings and conclusions for each factor to enable us to have a better grasp of things. So we start with the ability to rationalize. Let's look at some examples. Let's say you can get reimbursements for expenses incurred for business, for related meals. During an overseas trip, you met up with friends for lunch and paid for the meal. Then you realize they can be potential clients. So you think you deserve the reimbursement because they are potential clients. So you label and you think that you're justified. After all, giving them a treat and making them happy would have increased their client potential. And you will go on and until you find a justification that sits well with you and others as well. In short, we all rationalize here and there, now and then to the world and to ourselves. And when our own explanation makes us look good, all the better. The more easily we can rationalize our unskillful action, the greater the tendency to cheat, and more comfortable we are with cheating. For example, right, you cheat 5 minutes on a parking coupon, you say it's not going to matter, right, because the Singapore government is so rich. Now that is rationalization. Next, let's look at conflict of interest. I will give you an example to illustrate this point. A dentist acquires an expensive new equipment and wants to make the most out of it. With it, he can improve patient care and at the same time charges his patients for the use. So he looks for reasons to use it and intentionally or unintentionally ended up recommending treatments which he might not have done otherwise. Patients end up with a new crown, veneers, implants, just so that he can use the machine. Sometimes it is necessary and sometimes it is not. This is conflict of interest. The conflict is to give better dental services on the one hand, and on the other hand, to recover his investment. Okay. Now, I think it's already about half an hour. Shall we take a short break here for 10 minutes? From Professor O'Reilly's experiments as well as studies on the brain activity conducted by the University of College London, it was found that our brain can adapt to dishonesty. Telling even small lies desensitizes the amygdala to the emotions like shame that is associated with dishonesty. That is why it is important to cut down these seemingly harmless acts of dishonesty, because that one act might be important in shaping the way the person looks at himself. Next, doing acts that employ a lot of energy being depleted, especially mental energy, wears down our willpower, making it easier to succumb to acts of dishonesty. This is something we should take note of because on a normal day, we are continually tempted and our ability to fight temptations and regulate our selfish desires weakens with time and accumulated resistance. So those of you who are on a diet, try not to go near food which you cannot eat after a long and trying day at work. So I recommend meditation in the early morning before you start the day to place your mindfulness and your awareness in the forefront. Next, when participants of an experiment learned that someone else would also benefit from their dishonesty, if they exaggerated their scores in the matrix experiment, they ended up cheating more. This is called altruistic cheating, and it happened even if they barely knew the other person. Next, cheating is infectious and can be increased by observing dishonest behavior of others around us. Moreover, the line between lies and truth sometimes unclear, and because of that, we can become susceptible to other people's perception of what's right and what's wrong. Next, in some cultures, certain dishonest acts like downloading illegal software, not paying taxes, plagiarism may be frowned on, but in other cultures or countries, these dishonest acts may be more acceptable. Now, a separate study involving 1,500 people from 15 countries showed that individual dishonesty tends to be greater in societies with high degrees of corruption, tax evasion, and political fraud. Now, we have already covered these two factors, isn't it? Now, what increases dishonesty and what factors have no effect? Now we look at what are the factors that will decrease dishonesty. Let's look at these three. The experiment showed that doing something as simple as recalling moral standards like and signing an honor code or pledge not to cheat at the beginning of the experiment decreased dishonest behavior. This approach works even those specific moral codes are not a part of our personal belief system. In other experiments, undergrads were given a crash course on morality and then participated in the matrix experiment 2 weeks later. You guess what? Cheating did not decrease. So for ethical codes to have lasting effect, there must always be constant and timely reminders. And further tests shows that these moral reminders are ultimately still no match for negative influence that comes from observing the misbehavior of others. Next, direct supervision can reduce dishonesty and even eliminate it altogether. However, experiments show that the altruistic cheating overpowers the supervisory effect when people put together in a setting where they have a chance to socialize and know each other better. Why do we have to know all these? It is information that is not just good to know, but to some extent necessary because without it, we may continue to let dishonesty manage us and something without us even knowing about. Now with this knowledge, we can start learning how to manage dishonesty instead, and we will do so by using the benchmark set by the Buddha for right speech. But first, we need to look at the gray areas in lies. We will cover these three grounds, and we will start with truth versus truthfulness. To speak truthfully is to accurately represent one's beliefs or perceptions, which may or may not be true. Let me give you an example. Some years ago, my nieces watched the show called 那些年我们一起追的女孩. So it means you are the apple of my eye. My sister saw them happily discussing the show. Although she did not listen to their conversation, she assumed that the show had a happy ending, as the poster showed happy faces and blue skies. So when I asked her whether the show has a good ending, she told me yes. She knows that I will not waste my time watching sad shows. Well, this show has a bad ending. Boy meets girl, they fell in love, a beautiful love story, to have her marry someone else at the last part. My sister was speaking truthfully, but it was not true. Understand now the difference between truth and truthfulness? So it's always good to double-check facts. For example, believing that there is only one life and that a person will spend his afterlife eternally in heaven because of a belief or faith is something that we cannot confirm in this life, isn't it? But the problem is here, and in many situations in our life, is that when we hear or see something that we like, that falls in line with our prejudices or fits into our views of what things should be, we have a tendency to accept it blindly, even eagerly. We believe or assume that that's the way things are because that's what we want to believe. And the more tenuous the belief, the more we cling to it. Even the truth can deceive. Have you heard of this term called paltering? We may all have done this at one time or other in the past. For example, a mother asks a son whether he has finished his homework and he answers, "I have written the composition for my English class." This may be true, but that was yesterday's homework. So the statement was calculated to deceive. Sam Harris, in his book publicized in 2011, said that if you could stand in front of the White House and call the headquarters of Facebook saying, "Hello, this is Sam Harris. I'm calling from the White House and I'd like to speak to Mark Zuckerberg," his words would, in a narrow sense, be true. It is not a direct lie, but a deliberate lie. It is both easy and difficult to tell the truth. Easy because you do not need any effort, creativity, or imagination, right? But difficult when the truth can hurt a person's feelings or create a very awkward and embarrassing situation for him. And because of it, white lies are born. Now, the dictionary defines a white lie as often diplomatic, well-intentioned untruth. A white lie is sometimes called a benevolent lie because it is intended to benefit the person deceived for no ulterior motive, and it keeps a person from suffering unnecessarily because of something which he can do nothing about. Other less common norms include paternalistic lie or pro-social lie. Actually, this need for little white lies to avoid hurting others is something that most of us view, unfortunately, as the right thing to do. And studies have shown that people who feel compassion for others seem remarkably prone towards lying, whether to avoid hurting other people's feelings or to promote their welfare. So ironically, the most compassion we feel, the more we feel then for someone, the more we care for someone, the more prone we are to white lies. Now the question is, how far are we likely to go with this kind of benevolent deception? We will now look at certain scenarios which seems to justify white lies. I would like you to come up with answers or comments that are truthful or as close to the truth as possible. You may need some ingenuity. It would help bear in mind the preferences of these people. All right, and then you just note it, and we will discuss this next week. All right, look at these preferences. I'm going to give you the first scenario. Okay, before I do that, I go back here first. I just want to say a bit more. The first one, the person expects an honest answer. To give the person any less, because we want to separate him from what is may hurt him, would be to count his comfort and well-being more important than what he himself professes to value more. So for the second one about assurance, right? This is usually when you get questions like, do I look fat? Or is my performance okay? Right? And the last preference, number 3, is actually quite common. So there is actually no perfect answer for the scenarios, but the best answer would be to be able to satisfy all three. Right? Suggested answer will be given next week, but I would like you to just look at each scenario in turn and mull over it. Number one, the husband asks wife this. Reason why he asked, because Paul is very handsome and he saw the wife looking at Paul in the party. Now, how should the wife answer? Look at the three preferences. What do you think he wants? Okay. Next scenario. You receive a really awful gift. How will you answer? Look at the three preferences. What do you think she wants? Case number 3. Your friend and her boyfriend broke up. She's hopeful of getting back with him. You know that they are painfully incompatible and he's not good for her. One day, you overheard the ex-boyfriend telling someone that he is ready to start over if she gives him the sign. Unfortunately, after the incident, your friend decides to ask you this. What would you say? Case number 4. You know Ah Sing very well, right? Ah Sing feels that he is important to always live in full knowledge of the truth. He is against all kinds of deception and the kinds that take comfort that comes along with it. And a good Buddhist. Now let's assume that Ah Sing's wife cheated on him, and you know this for a fact. Further assume that Ah Sing's wife has just died. Sometime later on, you both met up, and he says, and he looks at you for confirmation. What do you say? Right. Woman is diagnosed with terminal illness. The doctor told the husband and the children the truth. What should they tell the woman? Case number 6. The person is on his deathbed. He asked you a question. The truth is something that will cause him emotional distress. What do you tell him? Your friend comes to your house to seek refuge from someone who wants to physically harm him or even kill him. You hide him, and soon after, the potential murderer appears at your doorstep and asks whether your friend is in your home. What do you say? Now, before we tell a white lie, no matter how harmless it appears to be, the intention behind the lie, as well as the nature of the benefit to be gained, must be weighed. And we also have to consider whether such lies are potentially more damaging than the truth in the long run, as it often is. Also, when we lie to spare the feeling of others or to protect someone, is that our true objective? Or because we want our lie to maintain the other person's good opinion of us or like us better? Or is it a case of being confronted with a difficult situation and telling a white lie is the easy way out? Exactly how selfless are we? Then we have blue lies, which is an offshoot of white lies, lying in the name of collective good, or lying on behalf of a group to gain advantage over another group. Such lies are frequently told in business, politics, sports, and many other areas of human life. In other words, blue lies are a product of an individual's attempt to meet the complex demands of an adult society. We will address this again next week in the last section. I'm now going to talk about the importance of honesty. The Buddha is famous for refusing to take a position on many of the controversial issues of this day, such as whether the cosmos is finite or infinite, eternal or not. There was one issue on which the Buddha's position was very clear. What kind of deeds are skillful and what kind of deeds are not? And the Buddha drew very sharp lines in making this distinction. Where did he draw the line with honesty is concerned? In the Ambalatika Rahula Vacha Sutta, the Buddha counseled Rahula, his son, who is a novice monk, on the danger of lying by using the simile of the water vessel. This little bit of water in a vessel represents the low level of trustworthiness of a person who is not ashamed to tell an intentional lie. Then the Buddha threw away the little water that was left and asked his son, which means that those who tell an intentional lie throws away any trustworthiness, even if they have very little to begin with. Then the Buddha turned the water vessel upside down. He then asked, by turning the vessel upside down, the Buddha demonstrated to Rahula that a person who lies turns his life upside down. In other words, lies can overturn everything in your life, causing disruption, leading to confusion, or even destruction of things you know and are familiar with. Then the Buddha turned the vessel right up again and asked his son, this is to show that empty is a person who tells an intentional lie, empty of right values, empty of integrity, and empty of trustworthiness. The Buddha impressed on Rahula the importance of not lying, even in jest. And telling a lie as a joke is the most trivial kind of lie, isn't it? A lie of least value and the least harm. So if the Buddha did not approve of such lies, do you think he would approve of white lies? This discourse was delivered to Rahula as a novice monk. If you have read some of his discourses the Buddha gave to his disciples, you will find that the monks were encouraged to maintain their mental cultivation throughout the day, practice mindfulness, exercising sense restraint, and taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and be skillful in the thought, action, and speech. Compared to lay people, it is therefore much easier for monks to practice right speech, as they have renounced the mundane world with all its comforts, distractions, problems, and complexities, and their focus in life is to attain liberation. As such, the Buddha's teaching on abstinence from falsehood does appear exceedingly harsh and even rigid to an ordinary person. My brothers and sisters, if we have confidence and trust in the Buddha's teachings, it is important that we have to adhere to right speech as best as we can, or else we will always fall back on our own benchmark of what is right, reasonable, or justifiable. And we will judge everyone by the same benchmark, which means that the level of dishonesty which we cannot condone in another is one that is higher than ours, and the level of dishonesty that think unrealistic or even abnormal is one which is lower than ours. What about extenuating circumstances? Can we then move away from the guidelines? If cannot, but we still deviate, then what happens to us? On that note, let us revisit these questions. I'm sure you can answer them by now. What about this last question? Any act of dishonesty is never harmless to the person who does it. It is still unwholesome. Any kind of intentional action, whether it is mental, verbal, or physical, is regarded as karma. Karma means action. Intention includes will, choice, or decision, the mental impetus that leads to action. In fact, as the Buddha said this, as long as you have the intent to deceive, you have committed an unwholesome action or unwholesome karma which will bear fruit in this life or in subsequent life. Next week, I will cover why we should avoid lying and how to reduce dishonesty.